a lot of the accommodations that we make in the homeschool setting, like, turning down noise,
Mhm.
helping kids focus, taking brain breaks, these are things we typically do with typical learners.
Hey everyone, this is Yvette Hampton. Welcome back to the Schoolhouse Rocked podcast. I hope you are having a really, really great day, whatever it is that you're doing right now. Thank you for just taking some of your day to listen to this podcast. We are back with Peggy Ployhar, and she is such an encouragement to me. She is such a blessing. I love how the Lord has used her in the lives of her family and her kids and her obedience to do what God had called her to do 20 something years ago, to start homeschooling them when she didn't want to, didn't know what she was doing, had very few resources. And then to fast forward all these years later and to see what the Lord has done through her obedience to him. And Peggy, you are bringing some much needed encouragement, much needed resources to, I know, hundreds of thousands of parents who really need this. And so I am so grateful for what you're doing and just for the ministry that God's called you to.
You.
Um, Peggy is the president of SPED Homeschool. So if you missed Monday and Tuesday, make sure to go back and listen to those. But before we roll into our program again today, I want to thank our sponsor again, CTC Math. If you guys are looking for a great math curriculum, go to ctcmath.com. They are an online math program. And especially, when we're talking about kids who have specialized learning needs, this might be a really great program for them. You won't know unless you check it out. If you're having a hard time teaching math to your kids, or maybe you love math, but you have several kids and you're just trying to figure out how to balance all of the kids and teach all the different levels of math, go to ctcmath.com, check out a free trial. It's not going to cost you anything at all. Just sign up for a free trial and test it out. See if it works for your family. ctcmath.com. Peggy, thank you so much for being back with me again today. In the last episode, we talked about a few things. We talked about therapy options, and we talked a little bit about curriculum. And those there's just so much information there. But
I know.
I know, and I know you've got a lot more information on your website, so people can go
Yes.
to your website. Let me ask really quickly: is there a membership fee or anything like that for people to
No.
go to SPED
So
Homeschool?
we are a nonprofit.
Okay.
So the majority of what we offer is free. It's actually paid for by our sponsors
Wow.
and our partners, who are the people that are listed on our website. We vet them before we even allow them to have a partnership
Yeah.
application. But that is how I have always wanted to fund an organization, knowing that our families are usually very much strapped
Yeah.
financially, and I did not want that to be a hindrance for them to get information. And so, yes, you just go to our website and do it free. We do have a paid ability to get one-on-one help, just
Okay.
like a support group, but we have free support groups as well. So the majority of what we offer is free for parents.
That's awesome. That is such a blessing. I want to talk about a couple of things, but the first thing I want to jump into, because we talked about it at the end of the last episode, is how do you figure out if your kids are on the spectrum? If you've got a child who you're just seeing something in them and you're just thinking, I know that there's something about this child that is
Mhm.
different. How do parents figure out what might be different about that child and how to meet the needs of that child?
Yeah, well, it's interesting because one of my board members, and you probably know her, Faith Behrens, who is
Mhm.
with HSLDA, sent me a research article that said we're missing about 60% of the kids that are on the spectrum when we test
Wow.
them.
That's a
So
lot.
I'm thinking, maybe we are not so maybe we're more typical than the normal. I
Right.
don't know, being on the spectrum myself. Because now we consider spectrum issues anywhere from ADHD
Mhm.
all the way to nonverbal autistic children, and everything in between. We all have quirkiness.
Yeah.
And so It's funny, I would have dismissed my daughter as being on the spectrum until she started calling me out on my stuff. And she's like, "Mom, I've been doing a little research and I'm doing some free tests online," which there are a lot of them out there if you don't want to have to pay for it, just to kind of check the boxes and say, what am I seeing?
Hmm.
And maybe start accommodating a little bit, or get your child a fidget and see, does this really decrease stress? You don't need an official diagnosis to give a child a fidget.
Yeah, right.
And make it work, and you don't need a lot of the accommodations that we make in the homeschool setting, like, turning down noise,
Mhm.
helping kids focus, taking brain breaks. These are things we typically do with typical learners. It's just that kids that have specialized learning needs often need them more, or we are more vigilant about using them. I mean, I went to school as a typical learner. It didn't feel like I was typical, but a lot of us that were on the spectrum that were, then realized later in our later lives that we were on the spectrum. Um, it we still learned,
Yeah, right.
but it's nice to know that there are some things that we can do, that, or like my daughter, she even says, It's nice to know that this is just what I can do to make it easier."
Right.
And even my oldest, who was diagnosed on the spectrum, chose in college not to have his diagnoses known.
Hmm.
And that's something that our kids can do too.
Yeah.
I actually interviewed a woman who said, even when you're in the school system and you can set up everything within the college to get accommodations, and your professors will not know it until you specifically disclose it to each individual professor.
Oh, wow.
And so you don't even need to use those accommodations,
Right.
but you can know that they're there.
Yeah.
Um, and they're available if you need them. So it doesn't hurt your child any
Hmm.
to have it undiagnosed, diagnosed. You can get diagnosed at any point in your life
Yeah.
if it becomes a need. But it's always nice to know, well, here's some accommodations that are used for people with ADHD, with dyslexia, dysgraphia.
Right.
Um, maybe you just need lined paper to help
Right.
with lining up your math, and all of a sudden things are making sense. So that's nice to know. Or you need a calculator. They're on
Yeah.
your phone now.
Right.
Or you need speech to text. Guess what? That's on your phone too.
Yep. Yep.
So, yeah.
Let me ask you a question. Do you think that at some point, and I understand that it helps a lot of kids to understand that they're on the spectrum,
Mhm.
but do you think that there's ever a time where it's harmful to kids, to their sense of self-worth, when their parent comes along and says, we see something going on, we're going to have you tested?
Mm.
I could see that a child might go, wait a minute, you're telling me now that there's something wrong with me, and that
Mm.
that could make them very insecure. Do you see that that happens sometimes? And how would a parent
It
deal with
can,
that?
but it depends on how you approach it.
Okay.
So, like with my middle child, who has dyslexia and severe dyslexia, um, I found a book that talked about the advantages of dyslexia, and it's called The Gift of Dyslexia. And
Okay.
the book talks about how it is a superpower. He's able to flip things around 8 different ways in his brain all at the same time.
Wow.
And it doesn't help that much when you read, but when you're thinking spatially
Uh-huh.
and you're doing other things, it is a true gift. And so to take it out of its box and say, okay, so this may cause you to struggle reading, but let's look at the advantages. The same thing with the autism spectrum. I have a railroad brain of a train. My brain works like it's a freight train.
Hmm.
And when I'm focused on something, I am so focused on something, nothing else matters. Like when I'm speaking in front of an audience, there could be kids crying, there could be all these other things going on. I don't even hear them because
Mm.
my brain is so focused on what I'm doing.
Yeah.
And so that is a gift.
Yeah.
The problem is when my husband asks me in the middle of me freight training something on my computer and says, "We should take the dog for a walk," I like lose it. Now that I understand this about
Because the
myself,
train gets derailed.
the train is derailed and it doesn't get on the track very easily
Yeah.
again. So, but I know that now. And so, training your kids, this but being on the spectrum is awesome,
Yeah.
because if you have to work from home, if you have to work in a busy office,
Sure.
you can get a lot of stuff done
Yeah.
if you're focused on it. But just know that if you have to change tracks, this
Yeah.
is what it takes. It takes a lot of mental energy. And so if you're a parent going, oh, that's why my child has such a hard time going from reading to math.
Yeah.
Yes, that's exactly it.
Right.
You got to give them that warning. The track change is coming.
Right. Right.
And we need to prepare for this. And then they can make that transition much more smoothly. But
So in reality, it really relieves a lot of frustration,
it does.
is what you're saying. Once a parent and child understand what is actually going on, then you can address the issue. And so it just depends on how the parent approaches
Exactly.
the topic. Because, if a parent goes to a kid and says, there's something clearly wrong with you, let's have you tested. That might not go over so well.
Yeah.
But
Exactly.
if we can say, I see some frustration in this area, let's see if we can figure out why there's frustration. Then I could see how that could really be a huge blessing in their life, not just as a kid, but for the rest of their life.
Yes,
I mean, that's huge.
Because otherwise, what they say now statistically is that a child up to about age 7 to 10 will say, oh, that's just something that happens in my life when there's different issues going on. When they get older than 10, they start blaming themselves for those issues.
Oh, wow.
So
Okay.
the earlier you approach these things as, this is just something we need to change to make this better for you, the better off it is, because then we start dealing with mental health issues related to undiagnosed needs.
Is there an age, like a kind of a specific magic age that is the best age to start testing?
The tests now are so accurate, they do them at age 3.
Okay. Wow.
So you're going to notice them really early on. They don't do so well with girls still.
Okay.
So that is
Interesting.
just coming about because all of these standard tests were written for boys
Oh,
who like to line up cars and line up trains instead of girls who like to line up their shoes
right.
and their closets. This is where me and my daughter fit into that category.
Yeah.
But yeah, so it's taking time. But there are some really good resources. One that I really opened my eyes, and I've been pointing a lot of women to that even like people I interview, and they say, Peggy, I think I'm on the spectrum. And I said, well, you might be. Read, there's a book called Autism in Heels. And
wow. Okay.
that was an eye-opening book for me because I went, oh yeah, that's, asking questions. Like I asked my mother when I was little, how do I make friends? And she's like, well, you just do. And this is what this woman said. Her mom told her the same thing. And I'm like, but I don't know how. I've learned to script how I approach people, and it's become natural over time, but it wasn't something that I naturally knew how to do.
Yeah. It's so interesting when you say that, because you told me that actually, I think it was last time we were together at the HSLDA conference. And I thought, that's so surprising to me because you're such a friendly person. Like I find it very easy to talk to you, and you seem, not like a super crazy extrovert, but very approachable. And that's incredible to know that is something that you had a hard time with, but what an encouragement to know that the Lord has worked in you and in your life to be able to make friends, because you're a super friendly person. And so I would never have guessed that about you. Let's take a quick break. We'll be right back.
What we do at IEW is break through the noise of the grammar and the writing prompts, and we say, this is what you do, step by step. And I've witnessed it over and over again, both watching Andrew teach and hearing from parents, this is the best writing program. We've made it so easy and made it really affordable. So any mom can teach writing to their children using our course, and we guarantee it.
To try 3 weeks of free lessons, visit IEW.com. We are back with Peggy. We have a few minutes left, and I want to talk about one thing that I know is so very important. I remember early in my homeschooling years when we were still living in California, and we had a Facebook group that was for our local, homeschool families.
Mm-hmm.
And I see a lot of posts on Facebook, but for some reason, this one still stands out to me. And this mom posted in the group and she said, I have a child with severe ADHD and I'm very lonely. And she said, I would really just like someone else who can understand what I'm going through, who would maybe just go to the park with me and my kids, you know. And a bunch of moms responded and said, I have a kid too. I have a kid too. And I just thought how neat that these moms are finding one another. And I had never thought about the fact that it could be a very lonely and difficult life to be in, a very difficult position to be in. So that's one thing that I know you talk a lot about is finding your community, finding your tribe, finding people to come alongside you. Talk about that for a minute.
Yeah. So a lot of times, you know, typical homeschoolers, they have their co-ops, they have their field trip groups, and those don't work for our kids because there's a reason that they didn't work well in the school system, you know, whether it was a private school, public school, whatever you call it. And I found the same with my kids. My kids got kicked out of them. And it was very disheartening because I needed friends. And what I started praying, I'm like, God, I just need 1, 2 friends. That's really all that we need. And God sent through different activities my kids signed up for, again, in their areas of interest. I would search out the moms. I'm like, who are you making friends with? You know, who can we? And we ended up, before it was popular, creating a pod. Now they're like the rage. We had no idea it was called pod. We just knew that I needed friends, my kids needed friends, and they needed friends who accepted autism quirkiness, because that's what we had.
Right.
And so these other 2 families had kids on the spectrum, and their siblings knew this is just what those kids do. And, you know, it's typical. It's because it's part of our family. And so our 3 families would get together every week. Us moms would, you know, just sit and chat. We'd hire a teacher sometimes for our kids. We'd do field trips together. That was our community. 3 families. And, you know, one of those ladies is still my best friend.
Wow.
And one of the kids, my middle son, is best friends with her middle son. So those ended up being lifelong relationships that they created too. And so it's not always quantity, it's quality.
Yeah.
And searching out, you know, going to those park dates and finding that kid that's kind of hanging out on the side that your kid wants to go hang out with, and then starting a conversation with that mom and just saying, well, what can we do together? Let's just see if, you know, do one thing at a time, see where it goes.
Yeah.
But that's how we develop community, because it's not going to look typical. It's not going to be large usually, and it's not going to look very programmed, because that's what our kids need. But it will be special, I promise you. And you know, and that's it. It's the same thing. That's why we're doing our first family camp this summer.
Oh, fun.
Yeah, we've partnered with Johnny and Friends, Johnny
Oh,
Erickson Tada's
wow.
ministry, and we are doing our first family camp. And because our families need respite, they need to meet each other. And we're excited to give 20 families an entire week together.
Wow.
And
Where
have
is family camp going to be?
family camp is going to be just south of Rochester, Minnesota
Okay.
this year. Yeah.
Okay. Wow. That's very exciting. Where can people find their tribe? How do they find these people? I mean,
Yeah.
you know, I see a lot of people connecting with others on Facebook, and, you know, that's great, but you might find someone who lives on the other side of the country.
Right.
And I know you're talking about, you know, finding people at the park and stuff, but what are some other ways that you can
A lot of
really
times we just
search out these people?
recommend to families to go to their state organization and ask if there's any support groups or support group leaders that know of, like, just field trip groups. Field trip groups are best because you can go to one field trip, especially something your child is interested in.
Yeah.
And it often will bring other kids, maybe that are interested in history or interested in science. And then you're going to just start seeking out other families that go to that, because you're not committed to more than one date.
Right. Oh, that's
it's
a great
not
idea.
a regular thing.
Right.
And so, but if you are on Facebook, a lot of times just your local group, where's the park meetup? You know, let's just maybe hang out on the outskirts and not be totally committed. But yeah, that's kind of where we've we've moved a lot in our
Yeah.
homeschooling years, and that's how we've always connected best. And not
Yeah.
always does it work, but yeah, you try it out.
But sometimes. And prayer, like you said,
And lots of prayer.
Lots
Yes,
and lots of prayer.
exactly.
And
Mhm.
maybe, you be that mom, who is the one who reaches out to the
And
others, like the mom did many years ago.
Mhm.
When I was in California, you be the one to put it out there and just say, hey,
Yes,
where are my
exactly.
people? Where are my people? We need you.
Exactly, because there's more people thinking it than are saying it.
Yes.
And so be the brave one and
Yeah.
say, "Yep, I need somebody."
Yep. Yep.
Yeah.
Well, and people like to feel needed as well.
Mhm.
So it's
Exactly.
a good combination. Okay, we are just about out of time, but I want to ask you about one last thing really quickly
Yep.
before we end. Talk about IEPs, because I know this
Okay.
is a buzzword when it comes to kids with specialized learning needs.
Mhm.
What are IEPs and what are they for? How do they work? Talk about that for a second.
Right. So an IEP is an individualized education plan, and a lot of people think, "Oh, that's only for the public school." Unfortunately, when we have kids who have special needs, sometimes doctors will say, "Well, where's your child's IEP?" Or when your child goes to a trade school, they're going to ask for the accommodations that your child had throughout their career in school before they'll give them those accommodations when they go into a trade school or college. Guess what? You need history. So an IEP is a way to track what accommodations you've given your child, to focus on goals, because a lot of times we're using multiple curriculums
Mhm.
to meet one goal for your child. And so it's a way to track all of that information in one place. It's not something you give the school, not something you give your school district. It's for you, but it also is for your child to help them to ask for the accommodations and to help them to advocate for their own needs when they graduate from out of your school. Here they have all this history. This is what works best to help me succeed in learning. And you've got it written down. And so even if your child asks for accommodations on the ACT or SAT, and I know those are probably going out the window in a lot of places right now, at least that's what I've heard, thankfully. um, but that College Board asks for that history, not just the test that shows that your child has a specific disability. They want to see that these accommodations have been used throughout their learning, and you're not all of a sudden just asking for the moon for a test,
Right.
because they're going to say, "Oh, well, when have they needed them in the past?" Well, you can say, "Here, I
Yeah.
have paperwork." And I've seen it proven more that that parents get those accommodations when they've recorded that history. And so that's why we offer a free download on our website on a template that you can use to write an
Okay.
IEP, and then step-by-step instructions on how to do that.
Okay. Okay. So
Mhm.
that's something that you can help with as well.
Yes.
Okay. So an IEP is really a document
It's
of the
just a
history of
document.
your child and the accommodations that they've had throughout their childhood.
Yeah. And usually
Okay.
you write them every year and
Okay.
then update them. But we
Okay.
go through that process on
So
our
it's
site.
similar to a transcript, or goes hand in hand with a transcript, kind of.
Yes, because then
Okay.
as you get into the high school years, you also write a transition plan on how
Okay.
you're going to meet their transitioning goals out
Yeah.
of high school. Mhm.
Okay. Very helpful. Well, we will put links to your website, spedhomeschool.com, in the show notes. People can go there, and there is a plethora of information on there. You guys will be so blessed by what Peggy and her team have put together to help you, any families who have specialized learning needs, kids who just need that extra little bit of help. And again, many families have it. I know many of you have friends who have kids who might need this encouragement. So make sure you share this podcast with them. Thank you so much, Peggy, for joining me this week.
Thanks for having me.
Yeah, it's such a pleasure. I love getting to talk with you, and I love what you're doing. You are a blessing to so many people. So thank you guys for listening. I hope you have a great rest of your week. If you've not yet left a review, please go do that right now. Leave a 5-star review if you love this podcast. If you hate this podcast, well, you probably don't, because you wouldn't be listening to it if you hated it. You would have turned it off a long time ago. So if you're still listening, I'm going to assume that it's a blessing to you, and it would be a blessing to us in return if you would go leave us a review. Thank you guys. Have a great rest of your week, great rest of your day, and we'll see you back here on Monday with another fantastic guest. Bye.
A mom said to me one time, "Aren't you worried about sheltering your children?" And I said to her, we care more about sheltering tomato plants in the culture right now than we do about our precious children. And so if someone wants to accuse me of sheltering my children, my answer is always absolutely yes. I will shelter my child until I know my child can stand up against the elements of the culture so that they can grow to maturity. And we slowly begin to remove the shelter from around them as we see that they are mature and that they understand the battle lines around them and can engage the culture from a position of strength rather than weakness.